Ilara Vance arrived at Black Ridge Forward Operating Base the way a stray piece of tumbleweed might, carried by an indifferent wind and deposited without ceremony. The transport that dropped her off was a dusty, unmarked utility truck that kicked up a plume of ochre grit before rattling away, leaving her standing alone with a single duffel bag. She wore a plain gray jumpsuit, the kind issued to civilian contractors, devoid of rank or insignia. It was a uniform of invisibility. The soldiers who passed her, striding with the confident purpose of men in a world they commanded, gave her no more than a passing glance. She was middle-aged, her face a neutral mask etched with lines that could have been from laughter or hardship, her hair pulled back in a severe, functional bun. In the hierarchy of the base, she registered somewhere below the mess hall cooks and just above the automated laundry machines. Her official designation was Sanitation and Maintenance Specialist, a title so bland it actively discouraged curiosity. She was assigned a small, windowless room in the civilian barracks, a concrete box that smelled of stale air and disinfectant. She unpacked with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. There were no photographs, no keepsakes, only a few changes of clothes and a worn, leather-bound book with no title. For the next 2 days, she was a ghost in the machine of military life. She cleaned the barracks, swabbed the floors of the command center, and emptied the waste bins of men who never met her eyes. They saw the jumpsuit, the mop, the bucket, and their minds filed her away as part of the background, a necessary but unimportant function of their environment. She did not speak unless spoken to, and her replies were clipped, direct, and utterly devoid of personality. She was furniture that moved. Her duties eventually led her to Hangar 4, the heart of Black Ridge. This was not a place for ordinary maintenance. Hangar 4 housed the X-7 Spectre, a prototype reconnaissance drone that was less an aircraft and more a whisper made of carbon fiber and classified technology. It was the reason the base existed, a billion-dollar ghost designed to operate in places no human could. Young, ambitious pilots competed for a chance to fly it via its Neuralink simulator, their careers pinned to the success of the program. Ilara entered the cavernous space, the cathedral-like silence broken only by the low hum of diagnostic equipment. The Spectre sat in the center of the polished concrete floor, its matte black fuselage absorbing the light, looking both menacing and delicate. She began her work, pushing a wide-head industrial mop across the vast expanse, her movements rhythmic and steady. The pilots and technicians, gathered around the simulator console on a raised platform, paid her no mind. She was just the janitor, a gray smudge at the edge of their brilliant world. Colonel Matheson, the base commander, stood on that platform, his posture as rigid as the regulations he lived by. He was a man who saw the world in terms of rank, procedure, and chain of command. When his eyes fell upon the woman methodically cleaning his hangar floor, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. She was an anomaly, an unscheduled variable in his perfectly controlled equation. He descended the metal steps, his boots clanging with authority. "You," he said, his voice not loud but carrying the effortless weight of command. Ilara stopped, turning her head slowly to face him. She did not straighten up fully, her hand still resting on the handle of the mop. "What is your name?" he demanded, skipping the pleasantries. "Vance," she replied, her voice flat. Civilian contractor, Matheson's gaze swept over her, taking in the nondescript jumpsuit and the impassive expression. "Your work order does not include this hangar, Vance. This is a restricted area. The sensitive nature of the asset requires minimal personnel." He gestured vaguely at the Spectre drone, as if she were incapable of understanding its importance. "My work order specifies all base facilities, Colonel," she stated simply, without a trace of defiance or deference. It was a statement of fact. This response, so devoid of the expected apology or acquiescence, seemed to irritate him further. He saw it not as professionalism, but as a lack of understanding of her place. Lieutenant Kalin, the program's hotshot lead pilot, sauntered over, a smirk playing on his lips. He was young, gifted, and fully aware of it. "Sir, maybe she wants an autograph." "Not every day you get to see the future of aerial warfare up close," his fellow pilots chuckled, a wave of condescending amusement rippling through the group. They saw a woman who cleaned floors standing before the man who commanded the sky, and the dynamic was, to them, simple and comical. Matheson shot Kalen a quelling look, not for the insult, but for the unprofessionalism. He turned back to Alara. Your duties are confined to the communal areas. This hangar is off limits. Is that understood? He was not asking a question, he was issuing a decree. Alara looked from the colonel to the smirking lieutenant, her eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on the complex simulator console behind them. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. Understood, Colonel. She turned, picked up her bucket, and began walking toward the hangar door, her posture unchanged. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back. Her retreat was as methodical as her work, a quiet exit that left the men on the platform feeling vaguely unsatisfied, as if they had won a contest no one else knew they were playing. As she left, Matheson turned to a subordinate. Sergeant, make sure the civilian contractors are rebriefed on access protocols. I don't want anyone wandering in here again. We have work to do. He dismissed her from his mind as easily as he would a fly, turning his attention back to the gleaming, billion-dollar drone, entirely unaware that the most valuable asset in the room had just walked out with a mop and bucket. Alara did not return to the hangar, but her work gave her a unique perspective on the base. She saw the things others were trained to ignore. While cleaning the ventilation grates in the Tactical Operations Center, she heard the engineers discuss a persistent power fluctuation in the Spectre's left-wing actuator. While emptying the trash in the pilot's briefing room, she saw discarded printouts showing recurring telemetry errors they had dismissed as sensor ghosts. She absorbed these fragments of information silently, her face a placid mask. She was a collector of overlooked details. Her movements were never wasted. When she wiped down a control panel, her fingers would hover for a moment over a specific button. When she polished the reinforced glass of the observation deck, her gaze would be fixed not on the reflection, but on the flight patterns of the training jets outside. She was observing, learning, processing. One afternoon, while cleaning a high bank of servers in a maintenance corridor adjacent to the simulator room, she reached up to wipe away a layer of fine dust. Her gray sleeve, damp from cleaning fluid, rode up her forearm, exposing a complex and unusual tattoo. It was not the crude artwork common among soldiers. No skulls, no daggers, no patriotic eagles. This was a finely wrought piece of ink, a pale gray phantom with an ethereal, flowing tail, coiled tightly around a bell that had no clapper. It was a silent bell. Specialist Davies, a young communications tech walking by with a spool of cable, caught a glimpse of it. He paused for a second, his brow furrowed. The design was strange, elegant, and somehow unsettling. It seemed out of place on the arm of a janitor. Cool tattoo, he said, trying to be friendly. Alara pulled her sleeve down without looking at him. Thanks, she said, her tone offering no purchase for further conversation. Davies shrugged and continued on his way, but the image lingered in his mind. It was a small, discordant note in the otherwise monotonous song of the woman's existence on the base. It hinted at a story far more complex than the one told by her gray jumpsuit. She knew he had seen it, but her expression remained unchanged. The tattoo was a part of her, a piece of a past she had buried but not forgotten. It was a key to a door she had locked long ago, and she had no intention of letting anyone find it. The pressure began to build on a Tuesday. It was the final qualification trial for Lieutenant Kalen, the last hurdle before he was certified to pilot the Spectre in a live field test. The exercise was a high-stakes simulation, a deep infiltration and reconnaissance mission into a heavily fortified virtual airspace. Colonel Matheson and a team of senior evaluators watched from the observation deck, their faces grimly focused. In the control pit below, Kalen was strapped into the Neuralink chair, his eyes closed, his mind soaring through the digital sky. Alara was cleaning the corridor just outside the simulator room, the rhythmic squeak of her mop on the linoleum a stark contrast to the tense silence within. Suddenly, a siren blared, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the sterile air of the base. Inside the simulator, every warning light on Kalen's virtual console flashed red. "What the hell?" he swore, his voice strained. "I've lost flight control. The drone is in an unrecoverable spin." On the main screen, the 3D rendering of the Spectre tumbled wildly, a dying hawk falling from the sky. The tech team scrambled, their voices rising in a panicked chorus. "Multiple system failure. Cascade event. I can't isolate the source. The gyroscopic stabilizers are offline. No, they're feeding back on themselves. Reboot the simulation. Abort. Abort." Colonel Matheson's face was thunderous. "Get it under control," he barked into the intercom. But they couldn't. The code was a tangled mess of cascading errors, each one triggering another in a fatal domino effect. The project's lead engineer, a man with 2 decades of experience, stared helplessly at the stream of incomprehensible data scrolling across his screen. "I've never seen anything like this, sir. It's like the core logic is eating itself." Panic was beginning to curdle into despair. Millions of dollars of research, years of development, all spiraling into a digital black hole. Through the thick glass of the control room door, Elara watched the chaos unfold. The flashing red lights painted the faces of the technicians in frantic, demonic strokes. She saw the desperation in their movements, the futility in their commands. She saw Lieutenant Kalen rip the neural headset off, his face pale with sweat and fury. She saw Colonel Matheson clench his fists, his jaw so tight it looked like it might crack. While they were consumed by the storm, she remained calm at its edge. She set her mop carefully against the wall, the handle making a soft, deliberate tap. Her expression was unchanged, but a new light had entered her eyes, the focused, analytical gleam of a predator that has just spotted a fatal flaw in its prey. The system wasn't just failing, it was screaming. And she was the only one who could understand what it was saying. Without a word, without a glance at the frantic personnel in the main control pit, Elara Vance walked to a small, secondary diagnostic terminal set into the corridor wall. It was an auxiliary port, rarely used and currently ignored in the escalating crisis. The red emergency lighting bathed her in a pulsing crimson glow as she placed her fingers on the keypad. No one noticed her. No one tried to stop her. She was the janitor, invisible, irrelevant to their emergency. Her fingers did not clatter or punch at the keys. They moved with a fluid, surgical precision, a dance of muscle memory and profound understanding. She wasn't hacking the system, she was speaking to it in its native tongue. She ignored the superficial simulation software that had the entire tech team in a panic. Her commands bypassed the user interface, diving deep into the machine's core operating system, into the foundational logic that governed the Spectre's virtual existence. She typed 3 short lines of code. The first isolated the feedback loop in the virtual gyroscopic controls. The second created a temporary partition to contain the cascading error. The third issued a soft reboot command directly to the drone's emulated flight controller, a function the lead engineer didn't even know existed. Inside the control room, the blaring sirens cut off abruptly. The stream of error data on the main screen froze, then vanished, replaced by a single line of text, "System stable." Awaiting command, the 3D model of the Spectre drone, which had been tumbling into oblivion, snapped back to a steady, level hover. A profound, ringing silence fell over the room. The technicians stared at their consoles, their mouths agape. The lead engineer blinked, then stared at his screen. What just happened?" he stammered. "The error cascade, it's gone. It's completely cleared. The gyro feedback loop is recalibrated." Colonel Matheson looked from the now stable simulation to his bewildered team. "Who did that?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. No one had an answer. Lieutenant Kalen, still breathing heavily, looked around the room, his arrogance momentarily shattered. His eyes, sweeping the room, caught a flicker of movement in the corridor. He saw Elara pick up her mop. She turned, her back to them, and with the same calm, methodical rhythm as before, resumed cleaning the floor, as if she had not just single-handedly saved the most advanced aerial warfare simulation in their arsenal. She had intervened, solved an unsolvable problem, and then simply faded back into the background, leaving only silence and utter confusion in her wake. The quiet hum of the ventilation system was the only sound in the control room for a full minute. Colonel Matheson's mind struggled to reconcile the two images, the bumbling janitor he had dismissed from his hangar, and the unseen force that had just tamed his billion-dollar beast. "Report," he finally clipped out, his voice tight. The lead engineer, still looking at his screen in disbelief, shook his head. "Sir, I don't know how to. The system override didn't come from any of our terminals. It was elegant. It wasn't a patch, it was a surgical fix. Whoever did it knew the system's architecture better than the people who wrote it." Matheson's gaze shot to the corridor. The woman was gone. He strode to the door and looked out. The hallway was empty, the floor gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Find her," he ordered the sergeant-at-arms. "Bring the contractor, Vance, to my office." Now, as the sergeant hurried off, Specialist Davies, the young comms tech, approached the lead engineer hesitantly. "Sir," he began, "that woman, the janitor. I saw her in the maintenance corridor earlier. She has this weird tattoo on her arm. A ghost, or something, wrapped around a bell." The engineer waved him off, too engrossed in trying to reverse engineer the code that had saved them. But Lieutenant Kalin overheard. A ghost. He remembered the name of the drone he was supposed to be flying, the X-7 Spectre. A cold knot of unease began to form in his stomach. The casual dismissal he and the others had shown her now felt foolish, an act of profound and embarrassing ignorance. The perception of Alara Vance had begun to shift, not like a slow tide, but like the cracking of a dam. The first fissure had appeared, and the pressure of the unknown truth behind it was building. An hour later, a new crisis arose, this time with the physical drone. The flaw Alara had fixed in the simulation was not just a software bug, it was a symptom of a deeper, mechanical issue. The diagnostics on the actual Spectre drone, preparing for its first live-fire test, were showing the same ghost errors. The harmonic dampener connected to the primary gyros was generating microvibrations that threw the navigation system into chaos. The live-fire test was in 12 hours. Aborting it would mean a catastrophic project delay and a black mark on Matheson's career. His pride was a small price to pay for success. He found Alara in the drab civilian mess hall, eating a slice of bread and drinking a cup of water, completely alone. He approached her table, the entire room falling silent as the base commander stood before the lowly janitor. "Vance," he said, his tone stripped of its earlier arrogance, now clipped and urgent. "We have a problem with the Spectre. The same one from the simulator. I need you to look at it." Alara finished chewing her bread, took a slow sip of water, and then looked up at him. She didn't ask why he was asking her. She didn't ask for anything. She simply gave a single, slow nod and stood up. He led her to the secure workshop, a place even most pilots weren't cleared to enter. The drone's primary avionics bay was open, a tangle of wires and circuits spilling out. The engineering team stood around it, looking defeated. Alara walked up to the machine, her eyes scanning the complex assembly. She didn't touch the diagnostic computers. Instead, she placed her hand gently on the drone's fuselage, closing her eyes for a moment as if listening to it. The engineers exchanged skeptical glances, but Matheson silenced them with a sharp look. After a moment, she opened her eyes. She pointed to a small, cylindrical component buried deep within the machinery. "The harmonic dampener," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "It's calibrated to the wrong frequency. It's fighting the primary gyros instead of supporting them. It's a manufacturing flaw, not a software error," the lead engineer scoffed. "That's impossible. It was calibrated at the factory to within a nanometer of tolerance." Alara looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "The factory specifications are for standard atmospheric flight. The Spectre operates at the edge of the mesosphere. The thermal contraction is throwing it out of sync. She then turned to a nearby toolkit, selected a specialized microdriver, and, with the practiced ease of a master craftsman, reached into the drone's guts. Her hands moved with a deftness and confidence that was mesmerizing. She made a minute adjustment, a quarter turn so small it was almost imperceptible. "There," she said, withdrawing her hand. "Run the diagnostic again." The engineer, humbled and intrigued, typed the command. A moment later, a green light blinked on the console. All error signals were gone. The system was perfect. In the silent workshop, the last remnants of skepticism evaporated, replaced by a profound and unnerving respect. The live-fire test was flawless. The Spectre performed beyond all expectations, a silent, invisible blade in the sky. The success sent a wave of relief and elation through Black Ridge. That afternoon, a sleek, black helicopter landed on the base helipad. Out stepped General Thorne, a 4-star officer from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the man who held the fate of the entire Spectre program in his hands. He was a veteran of countless conflicts, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard-won battles and heavy decisions. Colonel Matheson greeted him, beaming with pride as he escorted the general towards Hangar 4 to see the triumphant drone. They walked through the hangar, Matheson detailing the morning's success, Kalen and the other pilots standing at a respectful distance. As they passed a side corridor, the general suddenly stopped. He froze mid-stride, his entire body going rigid. His gaze was locked on a figure in a gray jumpsuit who was quietly organizing supplies in a storage closet. It was Alara. Her sleeve was pushed up to her elbow, and the tattoo on her forearm was in plain view under the harsh hangar lights, the pale phantom coiled around the silent bell. Matheson followed the general's gaze, confused. "Sir. Is everything all right?" General Thorne didn't answer immediately. He stared at Alara, his eyes widening in stunned recognition, a storm of memory and disbelief on his face. He took a half-step forward, his voice a low, reverent whisper that seemed to suck the air out of the vast hangar. "The silent bell," he breathed. He turned to the bewildered colonel, his eyes blazing with an intensity Matheson had never seen. "Colonel, do you have any idea who that is?" Before Matheson could stammer a reply, Thorne strode towards Alara, his movements now filled with a purpose that transcended military protocol. The pilots and engineers watched, utterly baffled. Alara looked up from her work as the highest-ranking officer on the base approached her. Thorne stopped a few feet away, his expression a mixture of awe and sorrow. "Spectre 1, he said, the call sign hanging in the air like a sacred relic. "My God. Your file, it's sealed." Marked killed in action after Operation Nightfall, he took another step closer. "We all thought you were gone. The original. The very first." The truth landed with the force of a shockwave. Alara Vance wasn't just a janitor. She wasn't just a contractor who knew her way around a circuit board. She was Spectre 1. The ghost. The legend they told stories about in hushed tones, the pilot who had written the book on the Spectre program before it even had a name, the operative who had vanished on a mission so classified most of them didn't know it existed. She was the woman the X-7 drone was built to replicate. The hangar fell into a silence so deep it was almost deafening. Every person present, Colonel Matheson, Lieutenant Kalen, Specialist Davies, the engineers, the guards, stared, their minds reeling. Spectre 1. The name was mythology, a whisper in the dark corners of special operations. It was the call sign of the pilot who flew the prototype, the Mark 0, on missions that were never recorded, a ghost who gathered intelligence from the heart of enemy territory and slipped away without a trace. Lieutenant Kalen felt a flush of hot shame creep up his neck as he remembered his snide remarks. He had offered his autograph to the woman who had defined the very art he was struggling to learn. Colonel Matheson's face was a mask of pale shock, his entire worldview, built on the solid bedrock of rank and regulation, shattering into a million pieces. He had threatened, dismissed, and belittled a living legend. General Thorne, a man who commanded armies, looked at Alara not as a subordinate, but as an equal, perhaps even a superior in a realm he could only imagine. Slowly, with a reverence reserved for fallen heroes, the four-star general raised his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. It was a gesture of profound respect, a silent apology, and an acknowledgement of a sacrifice he now understood she had been making every single day. Seeing the general's salute, Colonel Matheson snapped to attention, his own hand flying up in a salute that was both rigid and trembling. One by one, a ripple of motion spread through the hangar. Lieutenant Kalin, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only raw admiration, brought his heels together and saluted crisply. The engineers, the technicians, the sergeants, the young airmen, every uniformed person turned to face the woman in the gray jumpsuit and rendered a salute. They weren't saluting a janitor. They were saluting a ghost who had walked among them, a silent warrior who had sought no recognition and desired no praise. Elara Vance looked at General Thorne, her expression finally softening from its neutral mask into something weary, something knowing. She did not return the salute. She was a civilian now, a ghost by choice. Instead, she gave a single, slow nod of her head. It was a gesture that acknowledged everything, their shock, their respect, their apology, and the shared, unspoken weight of the world she had once carried. It was enough. The moment stretched, a silent tableau of revelation and humility. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the salutes were lowered, though the silence and the sense of awe remained. Elara turned away from the assembled officers, her back straight. She did not walk towards the hangar door or the exit. She walked towards the X-7 Spectre, her true counterpart. The crowd of soldiers and technicians parted for her, an invisible wave of deference clearing her path. She stopped beside the drone, its matte black skin seeming to drink in the light and the tension in the room. She reached out and placed her palm flat against its fuselage, just below the cockpit canopy. It was a gesture of immense familiarity, of reunion. The machine, which had been in a state of quiet standby, emitted a low, resonant hum. The pitch of the internal gyros shifted slightly, a soft thrum that sounded almost like a sigh of contentment, a mechanical purr of recognition for its one true master. The dust motes, illuminated by the shafts of afternoon light cutting through the high hangar windows, danced in the air around her. She stood there for a long time, her hand on the drone, her reflection, the anonymous woman in the gray jumpsuit with the legendary tattoo on her arm, staring back from the polished carbon fiber. Her strength had never been in what she said, but in what she did, and what she had endured in silence. The institution had been blind, but now it could see. Respect had been earned not through rank or regulation, but through quiet, undeniable competence. Spectre 1 was home.